Over to you.
Oh, wow, thank you very much. Good afternoon, our viewers and everyone who has tuned in. It is a lovely afternoon, irrespective of all the other, factors, the weather and everything, but I'm happy to have you all tuned in. It is the 23rd day of September 2023. Actually, the 24th. Looks like I'm still hours behind. But yeah, the 24th of September 2023. And this is an event brought to you by Coups Services Limited, our FIS one-on-one monthly program. And I am the host for today's session, Adeke Merijoy, the media manager. And in this session, we usually conduct and share views on various topics that affect Africa, I mean the world at large, but most especially our continent, Africa. And joining me are two esteemed guests, Dr. Manuel Brunner and Mr. Patrick Memamumo. And introducing our first guest is Dr. Manuel. He's a professor of public law at the Police Academy of Lower Saxony, that's in Germany. He also lectures on public international law at the University of the German Armed Forces, that's in Hamburg, and at the University of Potsdam. He obtained his first law degree at the University of Münster, and holds a Master's of Laws degree at Maastricht University and a PhD in the International Dispute Settlement from the University of Hanover. Dr. Manuel, rather Professor Manuel, regularly publishes articles and book chapters on German and comparative constitutional law and public international law. Dr. Manuel, you're welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Our next guest joining us is Mr. Patrick Memamumo. He is a trained advocate of the High Court of Rwanda and Kenya. Furtherance to the above, he is a member of the East Africa Law Society, holds a postgraduate diploma in legal practice from the Institution of Legal Practice and Development that's in Rwanda. He holds a Bachelor of Laws and a Master of Laws from Kampala International University in Uganda. He is a former assistant lecturer and assistant moot coordinator, School of Law at Kampala International University, still in Uganda, and is a former legal officer at Owino and Company Advocates in Nairobi, Kenya. He's not only that, but he is the regional coordinator, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Kenya for Coups Integrated Services Limited, our company. He's also a lecturer at the East Africa University in Kenya. And lastly, he is a legal officer and PA to the chairman of Granary Group of Companies that's in Nairobi, Kenya. Mr. Patrick, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Adeke.
We are happy to have you. So, Mr. Patrick, could you kindly give us an idea about coup d'etat?
Thank you very much, Madam Adeke, for having me over here. I'm very much honored, to grace this important, seminar that we are discussing, critical issue, which is actually an emerging issue, in our continent. And as I always say that we are Africans, and Africa is our business, and therefore these are very much more timely topics that we are dealing in. Just in a quick summary, when you talk about coup d'etat, we are talking, in terms of taking power, of course, over state, without using the mechanism that has been laid down, in that particular country's norms, whether the grand norm or other various norms. And therefore, it is taking power by force. And most of the times you find, this is much more, the parties that normally take power by force, these are the military, the people whom, are mandated to keep, peace and order in a particular country. So that is just, in a summary, a coup d'etat, what it means. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick, for giving us a summarized, version what exactly a coup d'etat how you would understand it and how it would be relayed to the public. However, Dr. Manuel, what would be your view on what a coup d'etat is?
I mean, as my esteemed colleague Patrick just pointed out, it is an unconstitutional transfer of power, where mostly a group that has physical power, like the military, like other security forces, take over power and therefore infringing the existing constitutional law of that particular country, because all countries in Africa have those constitutional norms in place, be it transfer of power via elections, like in most African countries, or be it like in the case of Eswatini, like in hereditary with the king there. So, and if you infringe those norms by forcefully with military power, at gunpoint, changing the political power in a state, that's a coup d'etat.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manuel, for giving us a view of, yes, what a coup d'etat is. Now, coup d'etats have taken place over the last 2 years in Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger, Gabon. Why do you think these coup d'etats are actually taking place in most parts of Africa? Dr. Manuel?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I mean, if we have a look on where coup d'etats took place in African countries and African states, these were mostly colonies of France. And there is and especially in the Sahel zone, this area is by now known as a coup belt. Yeah, because so many coups take place there, and the vicinity of it, and you named most of the countries where it took place. There is a distinct problem or distinct problems in those countries. One is, is a security situation with Boko Haram and the Islamic State and other militant groups are terrorizing those countries. Another thing in those countries is that the political leaders which are elected into office are often seen as corrupt, often seen as incompetent, and doing like self-enrichment. And this is also a huge problem for those countries, that at least they are viewed as such. Of course, you have to evaluate it on a case-to-case basis, but this is a little bit common with all those states. And then third is that there is in the last years we witness distinct view to get out the French influence in those countries. Because France has always practiced those so-called backyard politics with respect to its former colonies in the western part of Africa, and we'll see that those are like many in those states would like to reduce the French influence, and the leaders in those countries are often backed by France. So this is like a multi-vector approach to this problem. Why there are so many coups? Especially in those African states.
Oh, right. Yes, so it's actually in that belt whereby we're seeing most of these happening, though all over Africa there have been various over the years if we were to look at the history. Mr. Patrick, what would you say about this? Why is it that majority of the coups are coming from that specific belt of the area of Africa?
Thank you very much, Madam Adeke. I wish to associate myself with submissions made by the learned professor when you look at, the Quebec region, it's very unfortunate that these coup d'etats are actually, taking place, within that kind of region. And there are only two aspects why, from my point of view, why, of course, just as my colleague has submitted, that we're having this coup happening. One, of course, is the issue of the, our colonial masters. And then number two is to do with the leaders that we have in place in those particular countries. You find, of course, Africa is rich, in terms of minerals, and because we lack the capacity, we lack the infrastructure. You find these, colonial masters, the West countries, intending to come into a country and then want to, take charge, control. And when you find their leaders who are not, sort of a bit cooperative, then, and by various aspects that, we have these, colonial masters having, various conflicts of interest in those states, then, you find themselves contributing, to, having this coup taking place. And then the second aspect is the leaders that we're having in power. For example, when you look at just the recent one in Gabon, whereby, the Ali Bongo family has been, running the country for the last 56 years, and the country has not changed in any form. So it's due to these kind of leaders whom they don't want to leave power, and even if we are saying that the way they are being sustained in power, they are not following, the constitutional method, for them to be sustained in power. And it's a result of, this kind of behavior, of leaders wanting to stay in power. We are also experiencing this coup d'etat. Thank you.
Mr. Patrick, you've talked about, yes, our leaders staying in power, which is a very common thing in Africa. And you hinted on Gabon, but not only Gabon. I mean, if we look at the recent scenario, Gabon and Niger, we have seen their citizens celebrating, jubilating. Could you say that actually this is a celebration for a win of the coup d'etat or of the sort?
Definitely, it's a win. It's a win, and sometimes it all depends on which angle we are able to look at this particular kind of a scenario. Of course, it's very correct. We have seen Niger, we have seen Gabon actually going to the streets to celebrate the withdrawing of these leaders like Ali Bongo, and the rationale is because the country, some of these countries, have undergone a lot of corruption. The cost of living is extremely very high. And by virtue that these leaders are staying in power, and they are not, of course they will say they are sustaining themselves in power using the legal means. But then again, when we look at how some of these legal means have been conducted in terms of sustenance in power, then you find, it's for them. It's regrettable that a whole head of state can, win an election, 98%, and yet, it has been, the process has been characterized, with a lot of irregularities. And of course, there's one president in Africa, who said democracy is when, people elect you, and of course, you win an election, and then you are sworn into power. But sometimes people fail to understand that, sometimes election, it's a process, not an event. And therefore, all the process must be clear, must be credible, so that at the end of the day, we can have, a ultimate, leader. Just taking an example of Gabon, Ali Bongo had just won, his election before he was utterly being overthrown. But then again, we need to look at how was that election? Was it fair? Was it free? Was it credible? Absolutely, it wasn't at all. There were no international observers. There was limited internet. There was they put caveat, at night. So when you look at those characterizations, leading to Ali Bongo being elected, again it becomes unconstitutional. A lot of irregularities have been taken place, And therefore, since people, all the citizens don't have, the power, the voice, for the decision to be adhered to in terms of the ballot, then the only option remaining is for the coup to take place. And that's why, they're celebrating that, their militants have been able, to kind of come to their rescue. So I think that's the rationale why we have seen some of these citizens celebrating in the streets.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we do get that point. Dr. Manuel, would you say that yes, there is a justification that the jubilation of these citizens on the streets actually amounts to a coup d'etat? Does it justify a coup d'etat?
I would like to take a little different perspective. I mean, with governments being not credible, and governments or government leaders being not credible, and government leaders show themselves to be incompetent, there is always in the population the will to jubile when these people are overthrown. I mean, best example is Uganda. Like when Milton Obote was in power, everybody was seen in the streets and celebrating. And when Idi Amin took over, everybody was celebrating. But what came after, for Uganda, with the reign of Idi Amin, I think this is quite obvious that this is so. And I don't think that street festivals and celebrations of coup d'état could somehow justify it. You see, the problem is if this practice of coup d'états is continued, for every leader, how competent or incompetent he or she may be, there is always hovering above them this dagger that might fall down on him or her. That at one point, when the military sees them as not competent, it can just put them aside and oust them. And this is a very, very problematic practice. And so I personally do not think that this, therefore, to look upon the festivities on the streets really helps. Because afterwards, when the military takes over, what happens is that they form a military junta, and a military junta is usually not more competent to bring peace and welfare and stability to a country than a civilian government. Yeah, there are cases where it happened. For instance, in Upper Volta with Thomas Sankara, and then renamed the country, of course, to Burkina Faso. But in general, I don't think it's it is something that should be celebrated, at least not in most cases that we see in Africa nowadays.
Well, it beats my understanding. I think about it and say, okay, the military is said to be created to protect the country against external aggressors. So why are they interested in the politics and the governance of the country? What would you say about that, Dr. Manuel?
Yeah, well, the thing is that it is, especially as most states in Africa are they lack a certain degree of stability. Numerous states lack a certain degree of stability of political stability, and then politics and military affairs become intertwined very fast, and there is this idea that the military is a branch of the government, a sub-branch of the government, and as you correctly stated, is there for to protect the country against external aggression, or to help with, let's say, when there's a natural catastrophe, to help with with the efforts, to rescue people and stuff. This is what the military is for. But if military leaders become too interested in politics and try to exercise their power they have because they are the commanders of the military forces, this creates kind of an idea of, okay, we can handle things our own, and or we can handle things better than the civilian leaders, and this is dangerous. I mean, if we look into the history not only of Africa, but also on other continents, then it is quite clear that military juntas are not the better leaders and not the better political leaders, and therefore this is this influence that the militaries take into the political affairs in African states should be diminished. Thank you.
Surely, I totally agree. I don't think it would be right and proper to have the military being participating in the politics and the governance. Mr. Patrick, would you agree to this, view that yes, we shouldn't have the military participating in politics and governance, and they should stick to, the protection of the country, its citizens from various catastrophes?
Thank you very much. Madam Adeke. And of course, as I always say, we are Africans. And again, Africa is our business. And we cannot run away from, the practicals that we entertain in our countries. Citing an example, here in Kenya, our president is the commander-in-chief of the defense forces of our country. Is he a military person? He is not. So this is a civilian whom is a commander-in-chief of the Kenyan Defense Forces. To me, from that basis, we have brought military into governance, whether direct or indirect. Looking at the other angle, of course, military is also another arm or an organ of the government to ensure that there's law and order, and of course there's sustainability in terms of security in our country. But the manner in which we have seen the usage of our military officers, we have brought them into governance. Just citing another example from Kenya, we have counties, and our previous president, His Excellency Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, he decided, to transfer county functions, to a military officer whom he was one managing the capital city. Again, it is also to issue, directions to other entities, and brought in military to to kind of ensure that citizens are able to receive services as it ought to be. Meaning that we have brought military into governance. Are they better in terms of governance than civilians? Of course, I hold a counter opinion. Because the main purpose of security in our country, into issue of politics, we, the African leaders, whom we are civilians, we are the people whom have brought military officers into governance. Many elected presidents in Africa, especially when it comes to sustaining themselves into power, they have used military to sustain themselves in power. And that's why, by virtue of them having been invited into the table, they are easily overthrowing these civilians from power. So it is we, the civilian, whom have entertained military officers into governance, into politics. And on that basis, we should not even be complaining as Africans why we are having these coup d'etats happening, why we are having military officers engaging themselves into politics. It's because it is we, the civilian, who have allowed them. But practically, it shouldn't be like that. We should leave militants to do their job and let the issue of governance be for civilians. But it's because it's we civilians who are inviting the military. Then, from where I sit, we shouldn't at all complain. And of course, we must look at both advantages and disadvantages. I do submit.
So, Mr. Patrick, you're saying we have shot ourselves in the foot. We have allowed this practice. We have condoned it, so we must pay for the price. Okay, that's admirable. But yes, as you said, there are both disadvantages and advantages. And to be specific, in Chad, we have President Debbie, who was killed in the battlefield, and under the Chadian law, the speaker should be sworn in, but the military intervened in the circumstances. Help me understand what happened. Why did this happen in that way, Mr. Patrick? Okay, I think Mr. Patrick. Dr. Manuel, if you give us a view on actually what exactly happened in Chad, because yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, I can elaborate on the situation in Chad. So President Idriss Deby I think he was killed on the front line in 2021, because the village where he was at that point visiting the troops was shelled, and yeah, he was killed in that. And then who took over? His son took over, Mamad Deby. And this is then there was this that the military seized power, and the son of Idriss Deby, he was a brigadier general in the Chadian armed forces. So this is quite a move to secure power, in the family, which we do not know, like in politics usually, except monarchies, for instance. Yeah. And this is and I think this is the main reason why the military took over and the speaker was not sworn in. Beside that, here we come again to the role of France. France justified this rule by the military junta because of exceptional circumstances, as there is this rebellion in this, I forgot the mountain range, but in this mountainous region of Chad. So this is kind of curious, as France is a member of the European Union, as you all know, and is a member of the Council of Europe, and therefore is sworn to death to democracy, like all Western European states are. So this is quite a problematic behavior. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manuel, on enlightening us and elaborating on the situation in Chad. Mr. Patrick, what would you have to say about the military intervention when we're supposed to be having the speaker taking over? Okay, I think Mr. Patrick encountered the technical issues. However, we shall wait for him to get back. So, Dr. Manuel, we've had ECOWAS. ECOWAS is planning to intervene into the military. Would that be a smart move, or actually would be like, no, stay away from this? It shouldn't be What would you say about that? You were muted,
Also muted.
Dr. Mana?
Yeah, I was so
Yes.
muted. Sorry. I was so muted. So yeah, ECOWAS, this is the situation as we see with regard to Niger. It's quite different from the military interventions ECOWAS did in the past in such situations. So of course, we all know that the first big move of ECOWAS in this field was basically when they ousted the military junta in Sierra Leone in the late 90s, and ousted the junta there. And they took action with regard to Liberia, of course. And in 2016, it is well known that they forced out Yahya Jammeh from the Gambia in order to let Adama Barrow get to power, who was constitutionally lawfully elected president of the Gambia. So. I mean, the Gambia is quite a small country in Africa, and as it's Sierra Leone, and ECOWAS. In ECOWAS, the dominant nation, the dominant state, for obvious reasons, is Nigeria, and then you have those states like Ghana, or Cabo Verde, or Senegal, who also pledge themselves to democratic values a lot, and they are often willing to intervene in such situations. However, now with respect to Niger, the situation changed a lot because the military leaders of Mali and Burkina Faso, they relatively openly declared that they would, being ECOWAS members themselves, those states, having declared to actually help the military junta in Niger to against an ECOWAS military intervention. And we see until now, nothing has happened until from the time onwards that ECOWAS declared that they would intervene by military means in Niger to restore the constitutional order there. So when you ask me whether it's a smart move, I mean, it could escalate in quite a big conflict, and this is dangerous. However, ECOWAS, they have this international treaties in place that are quite strongly protect democracy and democratic values and elections, and it is quite a test for ECOWAS, I would say. Thank you.
Oh, yes, it would really be a very big test. We've had very many interventions over the years, and majority haven't, turned out to the best. So I'd say to a greater extent, everyone looks at the history and then looks at the present, and they're like, would that really be a great idea? But I don't know. Mr. Patrick, what would you think? Would this be a good idea? Having ECOWAS intervening in the military?
Thank you very much, Madam Madeke. Sometimes some of these organizations that we have, especially here in Africa, they are just, it's like a dog without teeth, are just mere barking, and they can't do anything at all. Will it be a good idea? Of course, it would be a good idea. But then again, why, first of all, why would they want to interfere in affairs of another country, yet the member states of ECOWAS, they are also sort of practicing the same kind of acts? And they were told they were, to intervene, then what next of intervening? Do they have the rightful mechanisms for them to intervene? Do they have a structured army for the organization? Absolutely no. So how effective then will they be if at all then they were to intervene? And furthermore, before they are to intervene, they can only intervene if at all, and this is my honest point of view, if at all the country is not able to sustain itself. But as you can see, the country is safe, the citizens are okay. So this is much more of an internal issue that doesn't need to be approached in such a manner. This is a matter that needs to be approached in a much more peaceful manner, negotiational manner, without necessarily having to throw militants, to fight against each other. And at the end of the day, again, these leaders, they know themselves.
Mr. Patrick? Okay, I think we have lost Mr. Patrick to network issues. Dr. Manuel? Yeah, you're here with me. Unfortunately, Africa and our bad network, we are missing such valuable information that is being shared by Mr. Patrick, though he made a statement that actually piqued my mind. He said most of these organizations like ECOWAS, I would also say the East African Community, these are mere backing dogs. Without teeth, actually, do they have standards and all that and the military to put forward in case they're to intervene? So what would be your assessment of ECOWAS or the East African Society as regional bodies in maintaining law and order in their member states?
Yeah, see, ECOWAS, in ECOWAS, I strongly believe that ECOWAS, if they want to intervene, from a military point of view, you always need Nigeria. Because Nigeria is, for obvious reasons, the biggest country and has by far the largest military of all those states in the ECOWAS region. So, and whether the question is whether they have the organization, it depends what Nigeria is offering as troops for such operations, and then which other states step in to help in such an operation. So that would be the military point of view. And then, of course, it would be a question of how big and how strong and how well organized the militaries of the other states are. But of course, a military operation will lead to bloodshed. We all know that. And this, of course, is then a situation that should be avoided at all costs. And of course, we should here for and foremost search for a political solution, not only for Niger, but also for Mali and for Burkina Faso. From a legal point of view, as I pointed out earlier, there are numerous treaties in place within ECOWAS that are on the question of the protection of democracy and stuff. And there is one treaty, I cannot remember the name, but it gives the ECOWAS the right to intervene into member states in such circumstances. However, it is one of the most disputed questions of international law, whether you can in advance, in an actual treaty, give such of a permission to a other state or to an international organization in order to intervene in your country. This is hugely debated under international law. Further is a point is that, of course, under international law, you're only bound to a treaty if you have ratified it. And not all states, not all member states of ECOWAS have ratified all those treaties. So the legal situation is quite problematic. Yeah. So this creates a huge amount of uncertainties in every aspect, in the legal aspect, in the moral aspect, in the political aspect, and also in the military aspect. So if ECOWAS would intervene, at least they would have the legal backing of democracy clauses in some of their treaties, but not necessarily, as pointed out earlier, a legal backing to actually employ military force. And then it's this uncertainty of whether it could be like a swift operation or a long drawn out conflict with then many death and a lot of destruction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bana. You've actually enlightened me and reminded me that actually our major topic for today is military coups. Is it a killer of democracy, or is it actually blessings in disguise? And looking at democracy, most African countries are said to be practicing democracy. Is the problem with the people or the choice of democracy that is being practiced?
Yeah, well, I've recently had a look into the Afrobarometer, I think it's called. It's this institute, it's well known in Africa, this institute for public polls and stuff. And they have conducted from like over 10 years studies on how democracy is viewed in African states, and they did polls and question, and yeah, they did polls in 30 African states, and it came out that democracy is viewed, the most people in those African states, the population has a favorable view of democracy. So it is not necessarily a problem of the people. Yeah. It is a problem that is a problem with many shades, so to say. Yeah, there is the need for a belief that the institutions of democracy really work, and for that, as we have heard earlier, they must really work. So elections must be transparent, must be fair. The leaders must be accountable leaders, must be credible in the first place, and second, let themselves be accountable if they fail. And that means if you are not elected, step down and don't try to stay in power with tricks and stuff. Yeah. So this is and under these conditions, this climate of coup d'etats, or a climate that creates coup d'etats, I would say could diminish. But the problems that I talked about now are just like 2 or 3 of those problems. In Germany, we have this idea of which is basically called politische Bildung, like political education, that through the whole society there should be a good degree of education on political affairs. And I think that is something that is quite a good idea to have, so that the population and the people in power and the government officials that they all embrace this idea of how a democracy is and how a democracy works. And if this can be installed on a much larger level, then it would help to avoid those coups, and also in general lead to better structures of government for many African states, I think.
Yes, surely democracy is supposed to be a must-do with certain requirements like fair elections and so forth. But at this point, given, Africa, most of the countries in Africa, if you look at their politics, words like fair elections are like myths to them. They're like, there's that, okay, probably stuff at the forefront, but what is really taking place doesn't involve anything that is fair. in all its sense. It's just a carve out at the front. Mr. Patrick, sorry we lost you and missed a lot of your, wise words, but here we are. Earlier on, you had said yes, the people do actually have a great job in either condoning or barring certain practices from happening in countries. So here we are. Most African countries are practicing democracy. So would you still say it's the people with the problem or the choice of democracy? What would be your view on that, Mr. Patrick?
Thank you very much, Madam Madeke. Let me say this. Windmill follows the direction of the wind. Windmill follows the direction of the wind. Is it with the electorate that we have the problem, or is it our leaders who actually have the problem? In Africa, of course, the presumption is that we practice democracy. In books, in our grand norms, in other various norms, indeed, we are practicing democracy. But how practicable is our democracy? And this much more comes when we have an incumbent in power. Then how safe are we that we're going to have free, fair, and credible election? Of course, in Africa, most of our countries, we don't practice democracy. And this is into two perspectives. We have to blame the leaders and also we, the electorates. Our leaders have failed to put the rightful mechanisms that will enable us have a fair, free, and a credible election. You'll find that the central government actually controls the legislative and the judiciary. They're going to make laws, they're going to enact laws that the incumbent knows that he'll use those laws in his favor. And then, if an event that there is a dispute after the election, then he knows that the judiciary will not do anything. Even we have had some, judiciary officials, some judges, aligning themselves politically. What do you expect if at all there's a dispute that's been placed before such a person? Would we really expect justice to prevail? Absolutely no. Is that the democracy that we're talking about? Absolutely no. What about we, the citizens? We, the citizens, we easily forget. Our leaders knows that one of our key problems is poverty. And during the electioneering period, we are blindfolded with money that we receive during the political season. And then we forget that these leaders, they will not allow us even to be able to exercise our democracy. And so because they have given us something, we even again end up voting for them. And they continue mutilating our constitution in furtherance of our democracy. So Africa, yes, in our laws, clearly outline democracy. But in practice, it's completely a different story. It's a sad state for we as Africans, but then again, we have to bear with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick, for sharing that view that yes, we all have a responsibility to play when it comes to pushing forward our country or continent. Literally, a very, very big role to play. But then we have some of our African leaders spending more than 30 years in power. Would you say that that is how democracy should be practiced?
Amazing, an amazing question over there. Let's look, for example, Ali Bogo. Ali Bogo family has been to power for the last 56 years. Let's look at just the former president of Chad. He was in office for more than 30 years. Let's look at, let me come back to East Africa. Take, for example, a country like Uganda. We have another man over there who has been in power for more than 26 years in power. And I hear there are rumors that he's still seeking again, also to be in power again. And then we ask ourselves, these guys have been in power for more than, 30 years, 20 years. How are they sustaining themselves into power? If we look, for example, like a country like Uganda, the current president, of course, Uganda has always been having elections. And I think that is what democracy demands. But let the people decide at the ballot, more so a secret ballot. So would you say that by virtue of the current president always being elected, they are not practicing democracy? Of course not. Because the people of Uganda, they always go to election and they vote him. And he said, in his words, democracy is when your people elect you and you win. But there's more than that. What we need to look at is their sustenance in power. Is it marred by any irregularities in terms of the sustenance or not? And of course, most of our African leaders, their sustenance in power, it is marred by irregularities. They bring election in the pretext that they're going to practice democracy, but always those elections are marred with a lot of irregularities. And that's how they've been able to yield themselves into power. And this even includes in terms of amending the constitution to prolong themselves into power. And I think that is the biggest mistake that we are doing as Africa. But then again, I ask myself, because most of the time I've been changing the grand norm to suit for their interests. Are we supposed to blame the leaders or it is we the people? It is we the people. Because some of these changes in our constitution, they go via a referendum. And if at all the changes made in parliament, we even find ourselves again, the same leaders whom we have elected, if they are going against our will, we are not recalling them. And to make matters worse, in the next election, we elect them again. Again, is it the windmill to be blamed of taking its direction, or it is the wind to be blamed? That's food for thought. Back to you, Madam Adeke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick. I think playing the blame game would be a very tricky one to indulge in. I think what would be more focused on is how exactly do we eradicate this so-called, I think it has now become a different version of democracy because it's no longer what exactly democracy is or how it's supposed to be practiced, but it has been altered and turned into a different mechanization that is barely acceptable to our governance and politics today. But apparently, that is what we are going through and what we are living with. However, Dr. Bana, back to our military coups and how they affect us. What are the implications of coups to the citizens, the economy, the neighboring states? Because that is something we really need to look into. We might have, yes, looked at what are they, what do they involve, what is endowed in the whole military coup process. But we haven't yet, enlightened ourselves or the world at large on the effects of all these. So would you kindly do that?
Yes, of
Dr.
course.
Bana?
Yes, of
Mhm.
course. So for the citizens, of course, you have to view every coup then on a evaluate any coup on a case-to-case basis. For the citizens, it can often mean they can continue their normal life, more or less. But it can also mean, of course, terrorizing the people, depending on how the junta approaches the people. And we have seen, for instance, in Burundi in 1993, where the president was murdered by by military officers. That of course there in Burundi it led to massacres and a huge scale violence. But in other states, in other cases, people could continue their normal lives. Yeah, so that depends heavily on how the military junta conduct themselves with the military, with the civilian population. When it comes to economy, like Niger is a good example of the consequences. It is that as nowadays, most international and international organizations and regional organizations pledge themselves to democracy. What can follow a coup d'état could be that those international organizations impose sanctions on the state where the coup d'état happened, and that happened with regard to Niger, yeah, after the recent events. And the EU, they are cutting funds for Niger, and do not pay money that was intended for infrastructure development projects in Niger. So this can of course affect the democracy. The African Union, when the whole democracy protection system of the African Union evolved in times of the Organization of Africa, still back then in the time of the Organization of African Unity, there was also the idea that there should be like that trade barriers should be erected to sanction a regime that came to power via coup d'état. So it could hamper the economy of a given state where a coup d'état takes place a lot, and then of course have a backlash for the civilian population, of course, or for the general population, because things are again getting more expensive and expensive. So this is that thing. And then you ask about the neighboring states. Well, as we can now, this famous term coup belt for the Sahel reaching until Sudan has risen to prominence. Well, it could, like, if one or two coups d'etats take place, it seems that it has kind of have a domino effect in African states, and so it can affect the neighboring states as well. And this, of course, like how exactly they are affected is, of course, has to be evaluated, of course, again on a case-to-case basis. But there could be those destabilizing effects on a sub-region of Africa due to coup d'etats. Yeah, So that's basically it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manuel, in giving us some of those. Mr. Patrick, how do you think these military coups have actually affected Africa at large? I mean, the citizens, the economy, the neighboring states, we would even say to some extent, the neighboring continents.
Thank you very much, Madam Adeke. Of course, there's positive and there's negative, of any act, and what we've experienced, especially in the Coup Belt region, to its extent, it has been on the negative perspective. And again, some of these things, probably as the time goes by, especially the latest coups, probably might have a positive part of it. And looking at, for example, like Gabon, they've been crying of poor leadership, from the previous leaders. Previous leader, of course, that is Ali Bongo, in terms of the economy, the cost of living that was a bit very high. And therefore, the expectation, is that one, at least we're going to have, one, in terms of rights, freedom, going to be gained. Again, probably we're going to see, its economy, being reinstated, the cost of living, coming down. In terms of corruption, of course, eradication as well. And that is, of course, will be the expectation, of the Gabon people, which, from where I see it, if that happens, that would be a positive thing, in terms of coup d'etat. As well, again, we also look at in terms of enhancement of democracy. If at all the leader whom has been, injected from office or withdrawn, if at all such a leader has not been practicing, democracy, then we foresee that, the next leader whom will come on board will be able, or the country will be able to exercise, their democracy as well. But again, of course, when looking in terms of economy in some of these countries, like Niger, like Burkina Faso, again, we are seeing as well, having issues in terms of the economy, and this, it's affecting a lot in terms of the economy because, they are not able to sustain themselves. Some of these countries, you have some African countries, they have to seek, aid from the European countries, and then of course, some of these European countries, especially whereby, their interest, has been affected, they're not be able, to help some of these African countries, and that automatically is going to affect. It's going to affect, their economy, in general. And of course, again, unless a coup is peaceful, then again, we're going to have, a lot of issues, happening in such a country. Just like, for example, when we saw, in Sudan, that, we are having issues of insecurity, in that country. And these are some of the negative effects that, of course, comes into place, especially when a coup has undertaken place. And of course, we know if we're told there's no peace, if there's a lot of insecurities, then it means that people are not able, to sustain themselves, and that becomes a big challenge because, a country without peace, then nothing much can be done, in such a country. So basically, that is just a synopsis of some of these effects, of course, that comes along with coup d'etat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick, for sharing with us that information. So, what would be your general advice for the African leaders, our military leaders, and the people at large?
Thank you very much. Looking at first of all, with our leaders, African leaders, our African leaders need first to respect our constitutions or their constitutions. all their laws. You are told the portion of the law stipulates that we are supposed to rule for 2 terms. Once the 2 terms are over, just exit office. Of course, I understand Africans love power. I don't know who injected that blood of loving power, but we as Africans, we love power. And we always have issues, while exiting from power. And of course, I will, gladly, ask other African leaders to borrow also a read from Kenyan people and government that, we are able to have a peaceful transition of power and without necessarily having to extend, tenure in office. And I think Kenya is becoming, a giant in Africa, especially when it comes to, respecting democracy or the tenets of democracy. Again, to the people, we as Africans, again, we also need to be at the forefront. We need to ensure that we use the means that are available to us to ensure that our rights have been respected, our rights have been upheld, and that we are able to elect the right leaders into office. We need to stop this issue of tokenism for a shorter period of time, and hence electing bad leaders into office. Again, when we have an opportunity to stop a change of our grand norms, then let us exercise that right. Let's come out, let's do the needful. Again, to our militant officers, let us stick to our core mandate. And our core mandate is ensuring that there is peace in our country, within our borders, and also within the country as well. Our militants should not be involved in issues of governance. However, again, in an event that we have leaders whom want to distort peace, then again, the militants should come into force and ensure that our constitutions, our various laws are respected. And they should not allow themselves to be used by the leaders in terms of sustaining themselves into power. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick. I hope that, yes, our leaders, or at least whoever they are put in charge for their media department or gathering news, have actually picked a leaf from whatever you have said, because it is really important for them to understand how great we need our, not only our individual countries, our continent, Africa at large, and to prosper. Yes. So, Dr. Manuel, as we summarize this session, what would be your advice to our African leaders and military leaders and the people? Because I don't think what goes on in Africa goes on a lot from where you're from. I mean, Germany, we don't have people staying for 30 years or more or so forth, and democracy being misused. So what would be your advice?
Well, of course, in Germany, you had also a misuse of democracy in the 1930s, which led to Hitler. So mostly every continent is tainted by these problems of people who like power too much. And what I agree with everything that my respected colleague put it forward in this respect. So first of all, political leaders must view themselves not as the state, but as the first servants of their respective states and as the first servants of their people. And the idea of democracy as given power over time, that is given to them by the population to govern a country by their best of their possibilities, and best of their skills for a limited number of years. That must sink in the minds of those who like power too much, as my respected colleague said. And of course, I agree with this practice in some that we witnessed in some African states, this constitutional amendments or constitutional revisions in order to secure a prolonged opportunity for presidency. This should stop. Yeah, if you have a presidential system, if you have a presidential system, power should be vested into you for a fixed period of years. Let it be, or for a fixed period of terms. Let it be 2 or let it be 3. I think that doesn't matter so much, but it should be limited along that line. And so this is for the political leaders. The military, for the military, what I think is key in this respect is that in the military universities and military academies in the respective states, there must be taught the idea of democracy. It must be part of the curriculum of those educational institutions, so that the officers, that they are educated in the spirit of democracy, and not view themselves as a powerful institution, but also an institution of democracy. And lastly, when it comes to the peoples, or the people in the different states of the African continent, they must live the idea of democracy in their communities, in their homes, and everywhere in the society. Democracy is, as we heard earlier, not something that it's just based in books, or just based in constitutions or in laws. Democracy is something that has to be practiced, and not only by the leadership, but by the whole society and by the whole population. And if this is working, then this will lead to much more stability in the political system of African states in general, not only with respect to coup d'etats, but with respect to the general stability of political systems in Africa. At least that would be my educated guess. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manuel. Mr. Patrick, we're so honored to have you here. We've come to the end of our session. However, we shall have a little Q&A. I think 2 questions for each of you, because we have our social media platforms flooding with a lot of questions, but we should just have 2 for each, and the rest can be answered by our guest speakers later and sent to you. So let me see. Okay, first question. It appears your guest from Kenya is in love with military takeover and is justifying it. Why? Mr. Patrick, this is to you.
That's quite a very interesting question. I'm not in love with military taking over. Of course, I would always, at any time, vote for civilian government in terms of governance. But then again, we are looking at the circumstances. We need to treat each case by its circumstances. Looking at, for example, the latest one of Gabon. Why would we be happy for one civilian to sustain himself in power for 56 years, and yet those elections have not been free and fair? Which harm will it cause if at all such a civilian is removed out of power? And then we have, again, of course, the power being again given to civilians through a democratic way, ensuring that, tenets of democracy have been respected. That is the angle that I'm supporting, coup by militants in some of these countries. So it's not because I'm in love with that, of course, no. It is just because if in some of these countries, that is the only way that you're able to have civilians or electorates, having their say being heard. So to our esteemed viewer, I don't support military coups. However, if it is needful, then why not? Thank you.
So, Mr. Patrick, you're saying either way, this or that, if we have to attain a goal, it must be attained, whether it is by a means that we do not agree with. But anyway, we're out of time. Let's not indulge into that. Okay, this one goes to Dr. Manuel. Dr. Manuel, in terms of governance, what can Africa as a continent learn from Germany?
Well, this is a tricky question. I mean, this is the thing about Germany is that the German system of governance is not we don't have a presidential system. We have a parliamentary based system, and which most African states do not have. Therefore, and we have this federalism, which is very strong in Germany, which also most African states don't have in this regard. So, learning from the constitution or from the constitutional practices, it's sometimes not comparable. But what I think would be a good thing would be ideas that are formulated before, the idea of political education through the whole society, that the state in a neutral fashion is responsible to give information to the society in school, not only in school. I'm not talking only about in schools and universities, but I'm also talk about in general life on how democracy works. And this is something that could be done so that the people in the African states are enabled to really know what they are voting for, why they are voting, what is the benefit, and what they can do if they do not agree with those with those in power. And this is quite substantial. And political education, of course, it is a question. Of course, it's not for free. You have to invest into it, but it does not need to be of like high fancy flyers and brochures and overly produced TV spots and stuff. You can have it on a much lower scale, which is affordable. I would think also for many African countries, and this would be something that could be where transfer of knowledge from Germany to the two African states could be highly useful. I hope this answers your question. Thank you a lot for your question.
Well, yes, I hope that actually answers the viewer's question. Wow, we're running out of time, so I'll just request our guest speakers to answer the next two questions, one for each in like 30 seconds. Okay, Mr. Patrick. Mr. Patrick is right on the mentality of electorate that keep electing underperforming leaders, but I think it's poverty. How can we eradicate poverty in Africa? Mr. Patrick.
Wow, that's an amazing observation. Of course, we cannot deny the fact that in Africa, of course, poverty makes us make some decisions, that are not right. But because we need something, for us to, put something in our stomach, we are being controlled, with a remote. That's why sometimes we maybe want to blame ourselves. But then again, I normally say this. During the electioning period, of course, it's the leaders who come with money, some food stuff and give us, just as a way of trying to blind, boulders and, kind of like, elect them. But then again, we still have that power. When you give me your money, at the ballot, I'll be alone. At the ballot, I'll be alone. Nobody will know whether I voted for you or not. And in every election, you'll find we have actually good leaders whom have very good ideas, but then again, they can be elected. Just in a quick one, we had, Pan-African Professor Patrick Lumumba, PLO, whom we wanted to vie for a member of parliament. But because he didn't dish out money, he was not elected. As Africans, we need to make that hard decision. Even if we get the money, when we go to the ballot, let us elect the right people. And if we elect the right people, they will empower us, and that's how we shall eradicate poverty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick. I hope our esteemed viewer has got the answer they are looking for. Yes, we have to elect the right leaders. They can lead us properly to wealth. Lastly, Dr. Manuel. Dr. Manuel, military leaders in the affected African states meet few days back. The African leaders, the military leaders in the affected African states met few back. Oh my God, sorry. Our military leaders in our affected African states met a few days ago and to have a military alliance among themselves and promise to support each other against any regional or international intervention. What is your take on that?
Yeah, of course, this is of course now a fallout from the many coups that have happened over the last 2 years, that they are like in close proximity to each other. There are so many states that are now run by military juntas that they are able to form such alliances. But from my point of view, this, of course, factual, it happens, but it should, of course, not happen because they are not the rightful leaders. They are not the constitutional competent leaders to form such an alliance. De facto, they are the leaders, but not under the constitution. And of course, such a situation, as we discussed earlier in this session, could lead to a real dangerous conflict in the Sahel or in other regions of Africa. I think you are referring to the meeting between the Sahel military juntas, and this then could be really problematic. And given that the leaders of Mali and leaders of Niger also reached out to Russia, to the Russian Federation, and to the Wagner Group to send this private military contractors there, that increases their military capabilities, and that might lead to a lot of bloodshed. And yeah, so this is, so I'm not keen on this, for sure not. Thank you.
The viewer will have to take up more, but yes. So at this juncture, we have come to the end of our session. We're very honored to have you, Dr. Manuel and Mr. Patrick. And at this juncture, I'll invite the president of Freedom Integrated Services Limited to give a special vote of thanks to our guest speakers. Mr. Abdikarim, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Adeke Joy, Mary, for hosting this show. It has been very educative. Before I give the vote of thanks, I just want to give a comment. My take, I think, is in Africa, we have this weird understanding of democracy and how it works. Our leaders do not understand that democracy is a call for service. Most of the African leaders believe that it's an avenue to enrich themselves and their family, to stay in power forever. And most of them have taken politics to be a full-time job, unlike in other jurisdictions where it's just a call for service. Once you are done serving your people, you go back to your profession. But most of those guys, they are full-time politicians, and all they know how to do is to steal resources of their people. And similarly, I think democracy is more expensive, very expensive for most of these African countries in terms of management, in terms of the types of legislature or legislative system they're practicing. You find most of them with as many as 400, 500 lawmakers practicing bicameral legislature and funding them without getting value for money. I think that's another challenge. And most importantly, like our guests have rightly said, there should be a political orientation for the electorate. Most of them are ready to receive sugars, to receive, petty things for their votes. And if we still, operate in that, with that mentality in 2023, then there is a serious problem for the continent. But of course, we hope and believe that with this recent happenings, the politicians will sit tight. They give people the dividend of democracy. They provide basic things: electricity, water, good road network. Create jobs for the people, and the continent will be okay, especially when we have the resources to do that. Having said that, I want to especially appreciate our invited guests, starting from Professor Dr. Mano Brunner. Professor was also part of the judges that presided over the last International Manchurian Mood Competition. Professor, thank you so much for your insight. Thank you so much for your research. And thank you so much for your opinion. We appreciate it a lot.
It was my pleasure.
We appreciate you. Thank you so much, sir. Similarly, I want to thank our regional coordinator for Tanzania, Kenya, and Rwanda, Mr. Patrick Mamamamo. Thank you so much for your research. Thank you so much for for the passion you brought to the show. And hopefully, our leaders will understand that. And most of your recommendations, especially also that of Professor Dr. Mano, our African leaders will pay rapt attention, and then they will implement that, at least for the sake of the continent. It is not politically correct that every 2 weeks, now it has become a routine, that will be having military taking over. And then you have the civilians, the people jubilating. Perhaps most of them do not understand why they're jubilating. They just want a change in government, irrespective of who is coming in. By the end of the day, once military take over, the constitution is suspended, together with all the rights and the freedom of speech, all other freedom that citizens should enjoy will be taken away by virtue of a decree. And so that's why we prefer that if you want to practice democracy, we do it, with observing the rules of democracy. So thank you so much, Mr. Patrick, for your comments. We've also had one of the judges that presided, that's Professor Kasim Balarebe, who joined us from the beginning of the show. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Our regional coordinators and our directors, thank you so much for your time and for being part of FI's family. We thank you so much. Adeke, I think there is announcements. I will allow you to make that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving that lovely vote of thanks. Now, this special announcement, it's a special shout out. Apparently, we're blessed as Fidas Integrated Services Limited to have two of our very own. That is our Director of Administration and our regional and our country coordinator, Zambia. That is John and Marvelous. On behalf of FIS family, we congratulate you upon the newlyweds. We're newlyweds, so it's all love coming from us. And we are happy for you, and we're happy to celebrate and this journey that you're starting on. is going to be amazing. We shall continue putting you in our prayers and know that the Lord has you and you're going to make a beautiful family. So for all our tuned in viewers out there, for more information on Firdaus Integrated Services Limited, our activities that are coming up monthly and quarterly, please visit our sites, our social media platforms, that is on Instagram and Twitter. We are at Firdaus_Integral1. On YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, we are at Firdaus Integrated Services Limited. And our official website is www.firdausintegratedservices.com. Get ready and tune in for next month's topic. It's going to be a hot one. Have a lovely week, all of you. Bye-bye.
Bye.